All right. So I guess we will get started. My name is Anne Marie Murphy, and like Ambassador Park, I spent much of the 1990s hanging around what was then known as the East Asian Institute. And also, like Ambassador Park, I was one of the students who met with the Weatherhead family in order to try to tell them the fabulous things that the Institute was doing to help educate the next generation of Asian scholars. And therefore, I am thrilled to be here celebrating the anniversary of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute and moderating this panel on Japan and the U.S. in Southeast Asia. Like the first panel, there's perhaps less uncertainty, but great trepidation among Southeast Asians about what a Trump 2.0 looks like. Obviously, they all remember Trump 1.0 when he slapped high tariffs on China, creating great instability in the regional economy, something that negatively impacted the trade-dependent Southeast Asian states. He withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and at that time, Japan exerted leadership to ensure that what is now known as the CPTPP came into being. Today, Trump has pledged to abandon the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, and it's very unclear with, as Professor Curtis has noted, a very weak Japan, whether under Prime Minister Ishii, we will see Japan able to carry out some semblance of keeping IPEF. Trump's appointment of China hawks portends a return to the days of lots of pressure from Washington on Southeast Asian states to join a anti-Chinese alliance, something that is anathema to regional states. In the past, Japan would try to smooth relations behind the scenes, but under a new prime minister who has called for an Asian NATO that was rejected, obviously, not only in Washington, but fully in Southeast Asia, it's very unclear how that will all play out. And the return of a climate skeptic who, has pledged to drill, baby, drill, portends very poorly for climate and energy transition initiatives where the U.S. and Japan collaborate on just energy transitions in Vietnam, Indonesia, and elsewhere. Therefore, this panel is extremely topical. We have 4 leading experts to discuss these issues, and they come to the topic from different perspectives. We have 2 prominent ambassadors, Ambassador Ishii from Japan, former ambassador to NATO and Indonesia, Ambassador Derek Mitchell, former ambassador to Myanmar, former head of the National Democracy Institute, as well as 2 leading scholars, Ken Jimbo from Keio and also president of International House. And I don't need to introduce Hang Nguyen to anybody here. We are going to proceed in a slightly different order from that on the agenda. As many of you know, Japan is the most trusted extra-regional country in Southeast Asia. A recent book on the topic of Japanese-Southeast Asian relations was titled Japan, the Courteous Power, obviously implying that other countries like the U.S. are not as courteous. Therefore, we would like to extend the courtesy of speaking first to Ambassador Ishii, who has a wonderful PowerPoint that will lay out many of the issues. So, Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I have a few slides to present to you. First, the impact of Trump presidency. I recognize 2 underlying trends. First is U.S. will become less inclined or lost enthusiasm to engage in international conflict, and not to mention the solution of the international conflict. And this trend is more apparent among younger generation. This means this trend will continue. And I think this trend would have been there anyway, be it Trump or be it Kamala. Second trend I see is Trump is not willing to use U.S. force abroad unless it relates to the United States national interest directly. So that is behind the fact that Trump is not sympathetic with alliance. I think in the last panel they are talking about agreement of special measures agreement with the United States and Korea, but I see a little bit of counterproductive effect that may have, which means, you know, the more you pay for the forward deployment, the more defense spending you make. It makes Trump believe that you don't need alliance. Korea or Japan can do it by themselves. Why do we need alliance? Why should the United States kill young American soldiers for the sake of the defense of Japan and the Korea who are able to defend themselves by paying enough money? So that's the second trend. So based upon that, I think generally speaking, Japan and Korea and all the countries in the region should do two things. First, I think allies and like-minded countries have to fill the vacuum U.S. withdrawal created. So I think Japan and European like-minded countries should be more involved in the solution of international conflicts like Ukraine and Gaza, which I call challenge sharing. In the past, it used to be the burden sharing. Burden sharing means U.S. is ready to solve the international crisis by itself, but it comes with cost, burden. So they want burden to be shared by allies and like-minded countries. But now they are not ready to solve the crisis anyway. So the other like-minded countries have to get engaged in the solution of the challenges itself. So this is an era of challenge sharing. And then if you solve the international crisis, you are criticized by every member of the parties concerned, because every party has to make a certain concession in order to come up with some solution. So you are hated by every one of them. And the U.S. has been very strong and resilient to these criticisms, but Japan and the European countries are not yet ready to do it, are not strong enough to assume those kind of criticisms. So the best thing we need to do is to get more support from the international community. That's why we need the support of global South countries to the way we solve the issues. So I would say this moving from the rule of fear. We've been afraid of the United States. You know, the U.S. has been very strong, and it's so unpredictable, even before Trump. So we've been more or less ruled by fear, but now we are moving to the era of ruled by majority. So we need a majority support in the international community. And second point is, I think I'm not too much worried about Japan-U.S. relations, but our bilateral relations will be affected what U.S. is going to do to other countries. Like if the United States lose interest in Southeast Asia, if the United States is not ready to support the Philippines, which is under threat from China, and then if President-elect doesn't understand the importance of Indonesia for the future international order, that creates vacuum, which can be easily filled by the more extension of the influence from China. So we have to do something about it. So that's the first big picture. Yeah? Then more specifically in Asia, I think I do see a good chemistry which has been developed between Modi and Trump. I think they like each other, although there will be a few problems. I think the Russian arms sale, the trade, and also I think India would like to have a better relation with Iran because they want to establish their version of a one-way, one road by utilizing the ports in Iran. So that can be deterred by Trump. Southeast Asia, one word, apathy, I think. The chemistry with Prabowo, which is a new president of Indonesia, with Trump may not be bad. Both of them are so unpredictable. And South China Sea, I don't see any remarks coming from Trump himself or any staff of Trump administration. So I think that the Philippines will be more or less deserted, and China's influence will be further extended. Now, separate from Trump or U.S. administration, you need to realize a major trend in coming to you in 10 to 20 years. There are three. First, at this time, U.S. is the only superpower, but in 2030s, I think there will be a world governed by G3, not G2. US, China, and India. I think you know the India's population is now more than that of China, and India's GDP will become bigger than Japan's next year. So I think you simply cannot ignore India. So in 2030s, you will see the era which is governed by the interaction among these three big superpowers. Then second trend is Indonesia. Positioning of Indonesia and India will be decisive for creating majority. Because India will become bigger, Indonesia's GDP will take over Japan sometime in 2040s. So by then, Japanese GDP will be world number 6 or number 7. Yeah? So I think which side, Japan, US, EU side, or the China, Russia side, these two big giants, India and Indonesia, will move an inch closer, will decide the majority of the world. So it's very important to engage them in an institutional way in the coming months. Third is de facto division among ASEAN countries will expand even further. So I skipped the sort of detailed explanation about why these divides have emerged. But there are only 3 countries among 10 ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, who are ready to rely on Japan more than they rely on China. So I think we need to help them. So we need to come up with some sort of prioritization of our bilateral relations, not only in Southeast Asia, but in the world, in dealing with, in engaging us global South countries. Now, what does this mean to Japan? I think Japan's fundamental objective and choice will not change. Coexisting with China without being told what to do has been the most important foreign policy objective of Japan in the past 2,000 years, I think, and that will stay. How to do it is a question, yeah? Since the end of the Second World War, by allying with the strongest and most trustworthy country, which happens to be the United States. So that's why we have Japan-US alliance, and with that in your back, we shake hands and smile with Chinese. That's what Japan has been doing. But you know, the relative supremacy of the United States over China is in a sharp decline. So in order to maintain the total deterrence power of the alliance, there are many things Japan has to do. First, Japan has to become stronger. 2% GDP defense spending, introduction of the counterattack capability, and so on and so forth. And we need to have a better coordination between Japan and the United States in terms of the operation of the alliance, command and control, more planning efforts, and so on and so forth. We need to strengthen network among the like-minded countries outside the alliance. Quad is one. You know, the trilateral we discussed in the last session is another. Then we need to strengthen deterrence by becoming best prepared, more prepared. I think we didn't talk about it in the last session, but we need to be better prepared for example, the eventual reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Because now the objective of ROK policy towards North Korea has become like inviting the collapse of North Korea by exposing North Korea to the outside influence and so on and so forth. Now, last but not least, the important thing is we need to talk to China so that they don't misunderstand our objectives. So it was great for both Japan and the United States to have the bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping in South America this time. And we need to keep doing this so that Xi Jinping understands why we are doing what we are doing now and how his decision is going to be affected by what we are doing. I can skip this slide. Then, so what should we do for Trump 2.0? I'll give you four ideas. First, establish Indo-Pacific caucus on the Hill, consisting of supporters of among the congressmen and the Senate of Taiwan, Japan, ROK, the Philippines, Australia, and perhaps India. I think each one of us, I mean, each country has at least a few supporters on the Hill. So if we pull our resources together so that their voices can be heard by Trump, I think that will, it's like a legal influence operation from our side. There's no point for me to insult the president of the alliance partner, but I believe he has no principle, he has no belief. He's just good at riding on the trend or wind. Then he has a very good instinct in identifying which direction the wind is blowing. So our task is create wind and trend, so that he's just ready to ride on it. So this is how we are going to try to influence his decision. Second, turn the crisis into opportunity. Myanmar. I think Myanmar has become the forgotten conflict in Southeast Asia, and without ASEAN becoming able to solve its own problem, I think you will never see the United States president attending the summit meeting they organize. So I think what we need to do is to create a negotiation body consisting of the special representative for Myanmar in every party concerned. Japan, United States, I'm sure Derek will become your representative. China, European Union, India, and maybe Bangladesh. So then negotiate with the military junta about what has to be achieved by what kind of timing. Then if we create a situation where the appearance of Trumps by fear can conclude a negotiation, that's so much better. I think if he sees something good in it, I'm sure he will appear in the negotiation. So that's Myanmar. Third, Japan should lead institutionalization in Southeast Asia. I think establish Asian Quad to engage Indonesia. As I said, positioning of India and Indonesia will be crucial. We have succeeded in including India in Quad in terms of institutionalization. We haven't done it with Indonesia. You know, Australia happens to have established Australia, Indonesia, India trilateral already. They are even having a ministerial meeting. So we've asked Indians to accept Japan as an additional member. So Indonesia, India, Australia, and Japan, which means Quad minus United States and plus Indonesia. That's why I call this Asian Quad. Now, we need to expand TPP by accepting China and Taiwan, and we even try to make a connection between expanded TPP and European Union, so that there will be a global free trade framework established except for the participation of the United States. And we need some kind of WTO like institution in order to stop the economic conflict from becoming political conflict or military conflict. So if US is not ready to make it happen, we need to create new WTO, excluding the United States. Simply because I believe that the market access for the United States is the best tool the United States has to attract the interest and the attention of global South countries, which you have voluntarily given up, which is not, I think, a very good way to proceed in making friends from the global South. So for Japan, in order to face with both the United States and China at the same time, I think sustaining the importance of free trade will continue to be a very, very big important objective. So that's why we have every reason to expand TPP and create something like a WTO. Of course, we're not saying that we will carry out free trade without any restriction. You know, small yard, high fence has to be embodied as well. So we need to establish a new security-related export administration institution. The best thing we have now is what we call Wassenaar Agreement. Russia is a member, Russia has a veto. So that Wassenaar Agreement has been paralyzed for some time. So rather than reforming Wassenaar, it's easier for us to create something new, doing the same thing as Wassenaar has been doing. Now, the number 4, the important thing is Japan should lead engagement of priority global South countries. Few more minutes.
Okay, maybe 2.
This shows the spread of the global South countries in terms of size of GDP as well as the population. This is Asia, and then the countries on the left side has a population more than 50 million. On the right is less than 50 million. So towards this side, I think the more GDP is bigger, and then the population is bigger. So if you look at this, you find out which are the priority countries for us to engage in future. In Asia, of course, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, in one way or another. Singapore, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines. These are the countries we need to engage. And Japan is ready to take responsibility for doing something happening in the backyard. Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, Chile, and Peru, right? Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and this is controversial, but Iran. You simply cannot ignore Iran. And then Africa, Nigeria, Egypt is gone to their side, but we still need to make some efforts to engage them. South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, Ethiopia is now a member of BRICS, but Kenya is excluded, so Kenya. So these are the countries we need to engage. How can we do that? I've written down a choice of priority countries here. I think one way to do it is use G7. I think G7 is the forum where we can sort of coordinate engagement of global South countries in terms of prioritization, in terms of division of labor. Japan will take care of Southeast Asia. Europe should take care of Middle East and Africa. United States should take care of South America, which is in a little bit chaotic situation. Now, the second way G7 can work in terms of engaging global South is, as I said in my question in the previous session, POPs, Permanent Outreach Partner. You know, in every G7 summit, they invite outreach partners. And in the past two G7 summits, common outreach partner was Brazil and India. And then it's up to each chair presidency to decide who to invite. Why not create a permanent outreach partner, which means countries who are invited to every G7 summit, whoever is the presidency. And I think in my mind it looks like this: India, Brazil, Indonesia, and or ASEAN chair, Nigeria or South Africa and or AU chair, and Australia and ROK. And perhaps Saudi Arabia and Turkey, we cannot ignore the Middle East. So by doing this, I think ROK, we can promote the status of ROK in relation to G7. So I think this is it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ishii. You certainly gave us a lot of empirical information that underscores the dramatic changes that Professor Gluck discussed earlier. Derek, may I ask you to speak, please?
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. And I'm ready for lunch, too. I don't know if we should just go with what he suggested. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Ayumi, for inviting me, and congratulations to Weatherhead and 75 years and my distinguished panelists. Let me just say, seeing all of that, not only do I agree with all of that, it really seems a lot more fun to be a Japanese strategist than a U.S. strategist these days, because a lot of what I'm going to say is about, mitigating and, a lot of concern about the future. But there's also a lot of possibility when it comes to Japan, and I really hope that the Japanese government and other Japanese leaders look at this and think, okay, let's go and do that. I mean, the fact is the rules-based international order, to me, the defining challenge, and I've said this from my days, even before I was president of the National Democratic Institute, when I was in Myanmar, et cetera, that the defining challenge of the 21st century is not U.S.-China per se, or this, rise of global South, et cetera. It's what are the norms, rules, standards going to be in the 21st century? What is represented by China? What is represented, as Professor Gluck talked about, this new environment that's emerging, all these new middle powers, all these smaller powers, they're going to have a voice. And what are in the norms and rules that were imposed after the war by the United States that kept the peace, that seemed to work when we were either a superpower or hyperpower, those are now under question. And the question is now, with the United States perhaps taking another break from this, we'll have to see what fills that place, who fills that place. And it is not a time for any free riding, even if it were Harris. And that's why I think under Biden there was the sense of outreach. Excuse me. outreach to smaller powers. It's the time of morning where I always get phlegm. I apologize. But it's going to be even more challenging with Trump and with the United States and what they represent. So when I was ambassador, the question I used to hate the most that I would get was, are you an optimist or pessimist? It was hard enough when I was ambassador in Myanmar and during the good times. And I would say, I'm neither. I'm a realist. I wake up every day and we just see the way things are and try and make it better. But I have no illusions about the way things are as an American looking at the prospect of the Trump years. So there are two caveats as I go into very briefly my perspective. And basically, you've heard much of it already on this panel before in this one. One is I'm a Democrat. I'll be open about that. So I will be objective and all the rest. We're licking our wounds. There's a circular firing squad going on who are shooting at each other. But the Trump supporters are all saying the concerns are overblown, nothing to see here. And in fact, we just don't know ultimately. We've said that repeatedly this morning. We don't know how things are going to turn out. And there is rhetoric and there's reality. There's Trump and then there's those around Trump. And I agree, this is not Trump 1.0, it's 2.0. So it's different than it was before. But you have, with Trump, the kind of America come home, you've gotten a sense of, and then the people, some of those around him potentially making, sort of the all about China crew, whether it's in Asia or elsewhere. Now, neither of those work terribly well for Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia doesn't want to make it all about China, and they don't certainly want America to go home or just think about homes. But we don't know, and this is these debates that are going on. And secondly, when we talk about Southeast Asia, as demonstrated by what was just presented, Southeast Asia is diverse. There are many different countries in Southeast Asia. There's no one perspective on all of this as we discuss it. And Southeast Asia typically is a sideshow when people look at Asia, unfortunately. And I think even more so, there's a concern now of what that means. Now, Trump's instincts, just very briefly, you all know, I think everyone here is probably as expert on Trump as anyone up on the dais. But what his instincts, some of it works potentially for Southeast Asia and some of it does not. His instincts for strongmen, his instincts for personalized politics can work. That's the Prabowo factor, or it's the Hun Sen or whatever else. He does. His discarding of human rights can work for the elites in Southeast Asia, not for the people of Southeast Asia, but for the elites, those elite relationships. That kind of dismissal of human rights and that stuff and that strongman attitude and the golf kind of thing, we play golf together, can work. We had hoped that would work in the first term. Didn't quite work out that way. And it's hard to see who would get his attention the way a Kim Jong-un might or others might. But those things work for him. What also works for Southeast Asia, we're already seeing this, is that this all about China, and we'll get to the issue of tariffs and all, that then companies are nervous about being in China. It's not easy to move out of China to the +1 countries, the one, Vietnam or India or Thailand. But those tend to be in Southeast or South Asia, and they can get the benefit of investments that are now unsafe in China. And China is doing a great job itself of pushing folks out and making it seem like they're unwelcome. Xi Jinping jiayou, he's doing a great job for us, thank goodness, when it comes to America and Asia. But this also can be working for Southeast Asia, this China first nervousness that companies have. What doesn't work, you all know. Unpredictable, disruptive, mercurial. Southeast Asia is quite conservative. They like to have some stability. They're business oriented. They're about their internal development. They want to focus on that uniquely. This unilateral instinct of Trump it just runs completely counter to the multilateral, confidence building attitude, the brashness. And of course, the disinterest, the uninterest, the apathy, as Ambassador Ishii talked about, is of concern. The desire that America show up. China's always there, and America not showing up does matter for the region going forward. They don't want to be. Now, you talked about how the region is choosing somewhat between the United States and China. But you have folks, Anne-Marie and I were talking about a particular individual going around Southeast Asia, basically telling them, choose. We're going to make you choose. This is before the election, as a Trump guy. but basically telling Singaporeans and Indonesians and others, you're going to have to choose between us and China. And if so, we may not like that choice, and it's not a very smart approach to Southeast Asia. There's a different approach, this kind of brash, toughness, that is kind of macho kind of feel that, they feel more manly that way, I guess. Doesn't necessarily work in these contexts. But that can be counterproductive where we have to make folks choose. Now, to these folks, again, Asia equals China. And everything's going to be seen as a function of, are you with us or are you not with us? Are you with us or against us? Is traditionally a kind of Republican attitude. It was like that during the Reagan years. It was during that during the Bush years. It's going to be probably like that during the Trump years. But it's a different era. That ability to get our allies to just side with us, fall behind us, and our adversaries fall before us, that was the narrative about how the Cold War ended. We just don't have that environment in Asia. We don't have that environment in the world. It was a narrative that was, as Max Boot writes brilliantly in his new book, about how that wasn't the narrative of how the Cold War ended. But that's been the narrative, even among the traditional hardline conservative Republican thinkers, some of whom are in this administration. That was wrong before. It's even less the approach that will work today. So you hear a lot about peace through strength. That narrative, peace through strength, you hear that over and over. The revival of Reaganism, peace through strength. That would appeal to Trump because of the word strength. It also appeals somewhat because he's conflict averse in terms of peace. You also hear, and of course, strength, by the way, equals military, pure military. So you listen to folks around him, it's about balanced military power. There's no other power that matters in Asia or in the world. It's just simple, military strength. And then you hear the revival not just of Reagan peace through strength, but of Nixon madmen theory. That, and he even says, I'm so crazy, Xi Jinping would never go after Taiwan. I'm crazy enough to do something. People will fall behind us because I just may do it. And even open about, that's how he views tariffs, is I will put 1,000%, 1,000% tariffs because it's just as a bargaining tactic, and then we'll go from there. And the question is, how far does crazy unpredictability go? How often can you do that? And what if someone calls your bluff? And we've seen Trump in the first term do deals, and they were bad deals. The Afghanistan deal, we forget, the Biden pullout, as bad as that was a Trump deal, where he wanted out that previous December. He had worked with, anyway, we don't have to go into the details. It was a bad deal. The whole fire and fury with North Korea and Kim Jong-un, those guys the Trump people touted, see, it works. It didn't lead to anything. Not sure what the strategy was, and Bolton is very clear that Trump doesn't have strategy. So, okay, there's an attitude here. What happens if it doesn't work? And then, because he's conflict averse and wants to make deals, he'll make bad deals, he'll compromise, people get his mark. And then folks who really get concerned about this are folks like the Philippines. It's not going to be Taiwan that the Chinese will test. It's likely on the Philippines. And it was hard enough, from what I understand, for the White House to get Biden to recognize why we should be potentially fighting over a bunch of rocks that are underwater at high tide, or there's a ship aground and we've got to help them. He literally looked at his advisors and said, seriously? Try and get Trump to want to potentially fight China, over these rocks. And so we know how Asia is and how sensitive the dynamics are of Asia, of commitment, of credibility, reliability. Once that starts to peel away, then what happens, to the rest of it? What does Vietnam think? How do folks make their choices? And it's not peace through strength, it's peace through submission. It's not the art of the deal, it's the art of submission, as I find oftentimes that Trump can carry they can speak loudly but carry a small stick ultimately. And what signals those send, who knows? And so it goes back and forth. But yes, I believe in peace through strength. I strongly believe in that. But how you do that, and just talk and all, I just worry about all of this. And of course, in Asia, credibility in Southeast Asia, I've said, but I would say in Asia broadly, U.S. credibility has always stood on two legs. It's been on trade and it's been on security. Again, with the elites. I like to think it's political. I like to think it's about, norms per se or democracy. It's really trade and security. And the way, our trade, the tariff issue, of course, is going to be another weakening factor in our relationships in the region, where there is no such thing as friend shoring if you don't think you have any friends. If you're a zero-sum kind of guy like Trump, he doesn't believe in allies. He calls them so-called allies. Certainly when it comes to trade, but otherwise he calls them so-called allies. I've never heard him use the term without that in it. So security, yeah, we want to do more, but trade, we've already fallen down on that, and whether it's Democratic or Republican administration. But once he sees that, we have a $200 billion deficit to ASEAN, we have a $100 billion deficit, with Vietnam alone, we need that's what his focus is going to be on, the numbers. And what we had hoped would be hopefully an integrated strategy. And Biden folks tried to recover somewhat on trade and security, IPEF and the rest, to make it integrated, is stovepiped at best, but works cross purposes at worst. And I just don't know that a Rubio or a Waltz, and people look at the people around him. I think these folks recognize in the first term the people that tried to shape Trump had to leave, and the people that just did Trump's bidding, they know they're on a very short leash on these issues, and one hopes they can do something to shape here. Wild cards, I'm going long myself. Two things. One, I'll get to the second one. Second, first is Malaysia and Indonesia are absolutely essential in the region. Unfortunately, an extra regional issue is affecting U.S. and Southeast Asia, and that is Gaza and potentially West Bank, and the Palestinian issue and the Israeli issue. That has hurt us. Some people say it's already hurt a generation of youth, young people, or just generations in Malaysia and Indonesia. But the way things are shaping up with Trump, we can completely lose that, and who knows what happens here at home based on that. So that's a big wild card issue. The other wild card is Myanmar. I can't talk about Southeast Asia without mentioning my favorite place. And China there is having its way, and they view Myanmar as their sphere of influence. And it's an open season, and Biden has done very little, which could be good for Trump if someone goes to him and says, Biden hasn't done anything on this, maybe you can do something. They're like vacuums. But I fear if there was any attention to it, it would be in terms of China, in terms of proxy conflict, which China is already talking about. That is a proxy conflict, and we're not doing anything there. So interesting to see what could happen in Myanmar. So the ultimate, I'll conclude on this. Two final very quick comments. The ultimate concern is not looking at Trump's impact on specific issues in Southeast Asia, but the broader strategic question. As, if we have an unreliable, mercurial, aggressively unilateral, militarily focused, zero-sum, all China all the time approach in the United States, how is that going to play? It plays right into the PRC narrative about the United States, all of that, to our strategic detriment. And traditionally, Southeast Asia has viewed the United States as problematic, and maybe they drift here and there, but they've wanted to have an offshore balancer. And I've asked the question of the Southeast Asians years ago, 20 years ago, when we had problems over the war on terror. Is there a floor beyond which the United States can go and a ceiling beyond which China can go, simply because of the structure when you have small powers, on the border of a larger power? And it's going to be tested of whether these countries will make choices. But we just don't know the practical impact on a region that, on the potential for shaking. And this is very dark kind of view, but I'm looking at very realistically from taking his own words and his own instincts. What does it mean for the United States practically? I actually don't know practically what will be the impact. Businesses will still try to do business in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asians still want America present. It is the engine of global growth in Southeast Asia. It will be attractive to many in the United States. So it really is a question mark. And I'll just say that I completely agree on looking to Congress. I think some of what I was going to say has been taken by others. Appealing, putting name on things and appealing to the business and the trade benefits, non-governmental, and the Japan-Korea. The last thing I'll say is I did one of these 8 years ago in Europe, U.S.-Japan. I remember challenging my Japanese partners. I said, it's your time to step up. You got to step up now. I don't remember if it was after or before Abe went to Mar-a-Lago, but I said, we're going to be on our lost weekend, for 4 years. We're going to be AWOL, and we need someone to step up. And Japan actually did. They did a great job. Abe Shinzo did an amazing job of CPTPP, and they were basically all that we've been doing since is based on Japan. You've been leaders, quietly leading from behind. Today, Japan-Korea is it. And I was glad to see that in the first panel. It's got to be bigger than just Japan, and I think we don't have an Abe Shinzo. But ways to fill that gap are going to be more important than ever to hold the line for America's security, even if we're AWOL in the next several years. So my apologies for our dark outlook, but it's, again, there's a lot of uncertainty in all this, but that's sort of how I see things affecting Southeast Asia. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, even if it is a very dark outlook. Can Jimbo, please?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here. I'd like to begin by thanking Weatherhead East Asia Institute, Lien-Hang and Ayumi, for putting this all together, and very glad to see Keio is now co-hosting this event in New York. Great to see those developments. My short remark will focus on the Japan-Southeast Asia relationship, and I think that Japan's enduring strategic interest in Southeast Asia, which I believe can be captured in two key dimensions. And the first is the extension of the US-Japan alliance into the region, and which can be characterized as bringing the strategic competition parts on one hand, and second, Japan's indigenous engagement in ASEAN in a much more non-competitive and inclusive manner that involves Japan's role in as Ambassador Ishii mentioned, it is like a gateway to the global south and the emerging multi-polarizing world order. And I think these dimension highlights Japan's so-called dual approach to Southeast Asia. Sometimes it's not being clearly mentioned in the official documents, but I believe these are the two dimensions which characterize Japan's engagement in the region. And I think Southeast Asia is the second forefront next to Northeast Asia of Japan's alliance-based strategic priorities. And it is more than a sideshow for Japan. We always consider Southeast Asia is a strategic place for us. And in recent years, mini-lateral frameworks like Japan, US, Philippines partnership have emerged as an important strategic connectivity of the three countries. Likewise, we did to extend our relations with South Korea to organize the mini-laterals in the Camp David Accord as discussed in the first session. The Philippines comes into play as a very important so-called lattice work in our alliance relationship. What demonstrates the U.S. strategic constraints whenever that the U.S. tried to engage Western Pacific is there's no land, especially for the access point for the U.S. Navy's Air Force to locate their positions. And I think Japan is too dense, and Australia is too far, so as the Guam. And I think a Philippine came out as a very favorable place for the location. And with the evolution of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which has successfully upgraded during the Biden administration, and 4 additional places, totally the 9 places to be developed as the U.S. rotational places in Philippines. And also Japan has its own kind of engagement in the Philippine law enforcement capability on the maritime domain by provision of the Coast Guard cutters, training capacities. And then that if those kind of low and high end can be connected together, that will be one of the role sharing model for the 3 countries to collaborate. And if that Japan could also provide like a financial support to speed up the process of the infrastructure finance in the EDCA sites, which is, I think, we don't know where you need a massive amount of the additional infrastructure development. And that could really become kind of strategic alignment, how that alliance function can be extended to Southeast Asia, starting from the Philippines, but it can be also added to some other places as well. And I think maritime security has been a common domain that we are now focusing upon, and that can be done together with the United States, or even without the United States, because it needs a variety of the capabilities to enhance the so-called maritime domain awareness. And we have a common operating platforms, and how much we can really have the mutual information sharing, what is at stake at the sea, especially in the South China Sea, is the critical areas that how much we can really bring in the strategic competition part to the Southeast Asia through U.S.-Japan dimension. And plus, I think economic security has become equally critical focus, and how much the kind of competitive parts can be brought in to this region. And the strategic alignment between Japan and the United States on the supply chain resiliency, driven by the geopolitical risks associated with over-dependence on China, has underpinned efforts to diversify investments in Southeast Asia. Initiatives like a China Plus One strategy are not only stabilizing global supply chains, but also creating opportunities for Southeast Asian nations to attract new industries and investments. So that I think sometimes U.S.-China competition may have additional benefits to Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia may not like those, competition or even the ignorance, but sometimes they'll get, I think, additional benefits out of those. And I think we have to capitalize those kind of benefit parts. IPEF is often criticized for not having a market access agreements, but this also serves the platform to connect Southeast Asia to Japan-U.S. economic security alignments. And something, when I interview with the Southeast Asian leaders, why are you interested in signing up with the IPEF? And they told me that without which you don't really have access to the U.S. Department of Commerce and BIS and those regulatory frameworks, and they don't have no intelligence on what kind of entity list they're going to lie up. And that will really heavily, into their businesses, because Southeast Asian economies are deeply connected with the Chinese economy, and which is the primary concerns for what's going to happen to their future industrial policies. And definitely they need access to the U.S., Washington, D.C. politics, and IPEF is a great, platform in dealing with this. So that, the Trump will abolish IPEF. I don't know that he will withdraw from it, but I think that will be the huge, I think, the benefit minus. I mean, it's going to be a huge minus for the Southeast Asia as concerned. Second dimension, as I mentioned, we are not always together with the United States when we face with Southeast Asia. And sometimes Southeast Asia may feel that Japan should not bring in U.S. component when we talk with Southeast Asia. They sometimes feel they are much more comfortable, Japan as an indigenous actor, not together with the United States. And for sure, for many reasons. And I think Japan recognized ASEAN's unique roles as a bridge between global South and established powers of the global North. And respecting ASEAN's strategic autonomy is a cornerstone of Japanese approach, ensuring that our policies align with Southeast Asia aspiration for autonomous and also those inclusivity in the same place. So this reflected in the Japan's updated free and open Indo-Pacific vision, which was upgraded by Prime Minister Kishida in his speech in India, March 2023, which was not really highlighted in the media, but I think it has a lot of policy attention should be, I think it should be recognized more by us, because it is 3 months after we released the 3 strategic documents, which is characterized by how Japan is truly into the strategic competition. But 3 months after, Kishida mentioned in India that we like to have an inclusive world by connecting the global south into those other parts of the world. And there's no string attached in our approach on the new plans for free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, I mean, Indo-Pacific visions. And we came up with a so-called 55 items of the cooperation. And as you see those kind of 55, there's no such kind of ideological, attachment with it. No mention about human rights, no mention about democracy. But I think it's kind of, more like a bazaar type of diplomacy. There's so many items that any kind of those recipient country can pick and choose what kind of Japanese capacity they will be needed. And I think Japan is ready to provide with the conviction that the connectivity is an important agenda. We not close the door in the entry point. We get into the place, but we will then like to run together in order to induce those emerging economies to the right place to go. Those are, I think, at the Japanese inclusive approach, we can be very much distinct from the EU and American approach into this region. And so this dual identity, as I think that it's quite important. And I think that how we can really align those dual approaches to the US-Japan relation is something that I want to say in a conclusion. I recently wrote a provocative op-ed article in Japan Times, and which entitled "The United States is Not Prepared for the Multipolar World." And that's very provocative. I respect all the academic foundation of the United States and how much that the US leadership has been leading those. And the United States is a quite unique state that provided international public goods for everybody to grow. But at the same time, that whether United States is truly prepared for the multipolar world, or they think that they are comfortable in position itself in the multipolar world is quite doubtful. But when you go to South Asia, Middle East, Africa, that's what they are talking about. They are creating their own order, and they always said, without U.S. participants or anything, it is only the United States who don't know about what's happening in the world. I think I'm sorry for my those words, but sometimes Japanese diplomacy comes to the United States and how we are aligned together with the values and platforms to see the world, and we can jointly create the strategy how to engage the new worlds. But that's one thing. But another thing is a dual identity. We are not bringing in United States to look for the world. This is something that we really need to align ourselves, so that the best model that I think that is needed is that United States will embrace and encourage the allies to engage the global south, so-called the global south. I'm saying about more like in the much more conceptual words of the global south, and then to bringing back those kind of assets to the alliance, and those are the way I think that how much that those bilateral relationship can really engage globally and use allies in its own autonomous agenda to go beyond what has been outlined by the the joint approaches that the United States and Japan can bring about. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hang?
Okay, thank you. So before I begin, I want to, in addition to again thanking Ayumi for putting this great conference together, I also want to thank the Weatherhead East Asian Institute staff, and in particular Julie Kwan and Susie Anthony, who really supported Ayumi in every way in putting this conference together. And I just want to note that this is part, this Keio Columbia Joint Symposium is part of the Japan Research Program, which we always say this, we joke around the Institute, we won't ever let Jerry Curtis retire, but we do have to let him retire. But before he did, or before he will officially, he really put together this Japan Research program, and we've seen it now under Ayumi, and we want to continue this into the future. So we really appreciate the support from Keio University and all of our supporters for this program. We want to see this continue into perpetuity moving forward. So I am a historian of modern Vietnam, and unlike Carol Gluck, I'm not as eloquent, and I don't have historical analogies that either apply or don't apply to what we're seeing today. And but I will double down on what she said about we're in the middle. And so it's really hard to predict moving forward what will happen in terms of where I'm coming from, Southeast Asia, and in particular Vietnam, how Vietnam will fare in this new landscape now that Trump is elected, now that Ishii is prime minister of a weak party. I will hedge myself. I'm a historian, and I find myself in this sort of very uncomfortable position where I'm making these sorts of predictions that usually my counterparts in political science usually do, those in SIPA, as well as those in political science, and I'm not comfortable with it. My advisors, John Lewis Gaddis and Paul Kennedy, used to say, "Are you a lumper or a splitter?" And I'm a splitter. And my history shouldn't be used by other social scientists. There's something that what I'm doing is really only explaining the past, and in particular the Vietnam War. But I appreciate that people still do listen to historians, and what I'm bringing is my current position as someone who, again, is someone who spoke or writes about modern Vietnamese history. But I've been in this fortunate position where I've started to put together events that really facilitate U.S.-Vietnam relations to promote reconciliation. In particular, in September, with the visit of General Secretary, then President Tô Lâm, from Vietnam to Columbia University, we launched what's called the Vietnam Executive Leadership Program, and that, again, is to really bring academia and scholarship to bear on Vietnam's economic development and how it can really negotiate the 21st century moving into the third decade and beyond. In addition to that, I am also someone who frequently travels to Southeast Asia, and I was actually in Vietnam during the election and recovering from jet lag when Ishii won in the runoff election. And so it was a very interesting time to kind of be away from the United States and watching events take place in Japan. I was with, as Ambassador Mitchell was talking about, I was with elites, and they had a very interesting response, at least to the U.S. presidential election when I was there at the Forbes Vietnam Women's Summit, and they were celebrating. It was one thing that I thought was very, again, I'm a Democrat too, and so I thought was a very wrong response, because I wanted to tell them, your business will suffer. You thought just because Vietnam benefited from the first Trump administration in terms of the U.S.-China trade wars, you're going to be slapped with that 20% tariff. Your goods will, your business it's not going to be all great. But I couldn't say that. I was sort of kind of censored while I was there. But it was an interesting sort of event to observe and to reflect upon as someone who is involved in this space in terms of U.S.-Vietnam relations, and seeing how Vietnamese, at least in this sense, business elites were responding to U.S. Political developments. And at one point, I got to get Tom Christensen, take him aside, because he did much more thorough field work in talking to Vietnamese government leaders about U.S.-Vietnam relations. But what I will say is, from my vantage point as someone who does talk to Vietnamese government leaders, I know that they're continuing on with bamboo diplomacy. They're still very focused on economic development, urbanization, and playing in that high-tech sphere to industrialize the digitalization of its economy. And it's all about more friends, less enemies. And that's not going to change under now General Secretary To Lam. And the only difference that I see happening in terms of Vietnam's domestic politics is that he's going to sort of continue in name only the policies of his predecessor in terms of blazing furnace to really clamping down on anti-corruption. But it's all to a certain point. He's not an ideologue, and it is to make for better business, to welcome more business, more foreign direct investment. For foreign companies to do work, to do business in Vietnam. And so he's much more of a pragmatist than his predecessor. And in that way, I think that I would just add that I hope, and I think this is what Vietnam is going to do, that they will rise quietly now with the new leaderships in both Washington, D.C. and Tokyo. And what I mean by that is Vietnam is poised again to be one of the biggest beneficiaries again, to the U.S.-China trade wars. Again, 60% tariff on China means that they're going to flee to Southeast Asia, and particularly Vietnam. They can continue to benefit from that as they had under the Biden administration. More Chinese companies are doing business in Vietnam. But at the same time, they could also be not the biggest losers, but one of the biggest losers, because in this Trump's America First, its populist and protectionist policies, Vietnam, now that it has gained, even in the 4 years since Trump's first term, to be, sort of 40% of all ASEAN products come from Vietnam in particular, that its economy is growing stronger, and it's moving from sneakers and textiles now to playing in that sphere that it always wants to do, which is against semiconductors, potentially semiconductors, and the automotive industries. And so as it grows in importance regionally in terms of its economy, it's going to attract America's and Trump's wrath. And so one of the things that perhaps it can learn from, particularly like Mexico, is rise quietly. Don't make a big deal about how well it will do under the or in the next 4 to 5 years. And so one of the things that helps, I guess, helps Vietnam and Vietnamese leaders is that there's two big developments. The first is the Trump organization is working with Kenbac City Development Holding Company, KBC, to develop in Hưng Yên province. And so whenever there's Trump's personal money involved, and his son Eric is also involved, this project will then again keep Vietnam in a sacred, not sacred, but in a good position in Trump's estimation. The fact that they're sinking what will be worth a $1.5 billion complex in northern Vietnam, luxury hotel, golf courses, we keep talking about golf. And then the second is that Elon Musk. So Elon Musk has now identified Vietnam as a key production hub for his Starlink satellite internet project. So this is moving from Taiwan to Vietnam. All good news for Vietnam. In addition to that, this is probably more of an unfortunate thing for the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. Tesla will also come to Vietnam, which will kill VinFast, which was potentially one of our sponsors for our Vietnamese summer language abroad program. So in any case, good news for Vietnam, bad news for the Weatherhead East Asian Institute and Vietnam Studies. But that's two major, there's Trump and then the person who is poised to have an outsized influence over Trump administration policies. That personal investment in terms of this U.S. administration, I think, really just bodes well for Vietnam. In terms of Japan, I'm again historian. I can only read what I see in the newspapers. I don't have those classified documents that will be declassified in 30 to 50 years. So reading from the recent ASEAN summit in October and the meeting between Pham Minh Chinh and Ishii, as well as the more recent APEC forum in Lima, and then of course what's happening today in terms of what's going on in G20 in Brazil between the newly appointed President Lien-Hang and Ishii, that as long as Japan is still involved in and invested in Vietnam's development, everything will go well. So there doesn't seem that Vietnam thinks that there'll be any changes in terms of the Vietnam Japan-Vietnam relations, and good things. I mean, they still see the $348 million loan to build patrol vessel Coast Guard as a clear signal to China, and then also the $2 million relief fund for Typhoon Yagi was received very well by Vietnam. And so in many ways, again, Vietnam really hopes to see Japan's investment in Vietnam, that it is Vietnam's fourth largest trading partner, so that's behind China, US, South Korea, and then comes Japan. And it's 2,000 businesses across Vietnam. Many, like Panasonic, Canon, and other companies are the biggest foreign investors in the country. So as long as Japan still, invests in Vietnam's urban development, particularly this high-speed rail, green transition, all will be good in terms of the regional picture. And so many ways, that Jimbo, you and I, it's good to hear that, that there's really not apathy in terms of Tokyo's policy, economic and otherwise, towards Southeast Asia, in particular Vietnam, but that it's still seen as a sort of pivotal region, and in particular bilateral relations between the two countries. But I'll end there. I could also answer questions thanks to a recent event I did with Peter Young that made me take this crash course in chemical industry in Vietnam. I could speak a bit to that, but I think I could thank Professor Jano for putting a good word in for me, because I thought I spoke eloquently to these senior execs in the chemical industry. But all I will say there is another thing that bodes well for Vietnam, because it's doubling down on its industrialization through its chemical industry, the 2030-2040 benchmark that it's putting for how Vietnam can can kind of leapfrog over or go from a middle income country to a high income country by its green chemical revolution and its chemical industry. Again, all bodes well for Vietnam, and puts it on the sort of leading path in terms of Southeast Asia regional development. So I'll end there because I would love to get questions.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. We've had an extremely fascinating discussion, and I guess I just want to comment on a couple of issues that came out, pose a question or two to the panel, and then open it up to discussion. One of the things that really became clear is the different place of Southeast Asia, right to the U.S. and Japan. As Ken said, Southeast Asia is number 2 on Japan's foreign policy agenda outside of Northeast Asia. For the U.S., it doesn't rise to the foreign policy agenda, except in the context, really, of Sino-U.S. competition, despite the fact that it's collectively the U.S.'s, third or fourth economic partner. So that raises a couple of questions. Derek, you said, will Japan step up, right? And so listening to the set of issues that were discussed in the first panel, if Japan only has so much input into the Trump administration, is it going to step up with its concerns in Northeast Asia? Or to what extent is it really going to use some of its, time to emphasize some of those critical issues in Southeast Asia? I don't know if Japan sees it as a possible choice. Ken, you indicated that Japan sees Southeast Asia, driven through 2 issues. Number 1, the expansion of the alliance. And you mentioned Japan doing a lot of work now, potentially in the Philippines with EDSA for infrastructure. And we heard from Derek that it was hard enough to get Biden to agree to enhance security ties with the Philippines. How do we sell Trump on a bunch of rocks? So I guess I want to put to both of you, particularly Derek, who was very pessimistic on this issue. Is there a way how do you hook the Trump administration if it really wants peace through strength? And if, as Ken says, the U.S. Air Force needs a landing pad, the Philippines is it. How can we together convince the Trump administration, if at all? What do you think the prospects are of, kind of selling that kind of security issue to get continued cooperation where the U.S. and Japan have done so much on the Philippines? And then I guess the second issue, Ambassador Ishii and Ken both talked about the critical role of both ASEAN and the global South, right? Something the U.S. doesn't pay much attention to. Again, given the anti-American sentiment across much of Southeast Asia, is there a way that we can imagine framing engagement with the global South, not just straight out about China, right? Because China is clearly using its position in BRICS. We've just seen Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand announce their intention to join the BRICS. China is using the BRICS and the global South to position itself as a leader vis-a-vis the U.S. and the West. Not that we always want to focus in on Sino-U.S. competition, but how do we engender attention and cooperation and framing it in this era where there is going to be a lack of attention to the norms and rules, as Derek indicated. So maybe I could get a couple of responses briefly, perhaps from the panel, and then we'll open it up for a few questions before time runs out.
Who first? Me? Me first? Or is it Japan or? Okay, well, just on how do we get your question was how do we get the Trump administration
Right.
to play ball on the Philippines specifically? You think it's going to be difficult. Again, I think Scott laid out a number of sort of ways to get at Trump, and again, there's a difference between Trump and the people near Trump. I think the people near Trump, where it's all about China, will see the need to stick with allies, and I think they can make the case to Trump that not to stand with our allies is to look weak. We will look weak. We will be retreating. We will, again, appealing to that peace through strength, madman thing. I think one thing I didn't put on the list of what may not work, or what may work for Trump in Southeast Asia, which we've gotten at otherwise, which is, just put a name on it, corruption. I mean, pay off his family, have him buy, hotels, whatever else, those types of deals. Trump is very comfortable. I don't see necessarily many constraints on him or his family these days. They may end up going that route, and people can quietly do that kind of thing, showing the United States that we're buying your weapons and we are taking care of our own defense. That is typically, he says we shouldn't be fighting and dying for these folks. They should be doing it for themselves. That's why Taiwan needs 10% of its GDP for defense, and it's why Scott was saying just repackage that $10 billion to include defense industrial development. Those are the types of ways you get a Trump. I imagine that the people, the Waltz and the Rubio folks and the others on the Hill who are close to him, who see it all about China, will be making that case as hard as they possibly can. And that's why Congress is going to be important. The people that, whether it's Cotton or just saying, you've got to do this, Mr. President, you're going to look weak, you got to stand up for this because China will have your mark and you can't do a deal with them on this, you can't do a deal on tariffs or whatever it is. That's the only way to appeal to him, I think. It's not going to be on the strategic issue. It's going to be on the personalized. And Marcos, maybe his name and his background is sort of a strongman son. Maybe he can play on that.
Okay.
Who knows?
Thank you.
I think one way to do it is to make Trump understand that these Southeast Asian countries can be very useful in solving international crisis. Indonesia has been playing a very important role in sort of not mediating, but making a group among the Palestinians and Israelis. They've been doing these reconciliation conferences consistently in the past few years. So I think we need involvement of such countries as Indonesia and possibly Malaysia in the solution of Middle East issues, like including Gaza. I know it sounds a little bit dreamy, but I think they can play a certain role, and Philippines as well. I think the what's very important if and when Taiwan contingency happens is to maintain the flow of goods, transportation, sea line protection, sea lines communication, and we need to involve those countries on route of sea lines communication, particularly the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. You know, recently, a couple of weeks ago, the Philippine Coast Guard and the National Security Council organized conferences among the United States, Japan, Germany, Canada, and other countries for talking about the maritime security. It's a very one way to start sort of a loose coalition among like-minded countries who are ready to step up their efforts for protecting the sea lines of communication. And Japan is happy to promote that kind of effort. So Philippines has been playing a certain role in doing so. It's very useful. So by establishing this kind of a mechanism, you can show to the Trump administration people that they can be useful. They can make a certain role. So I think we need to be specific about appealing what it means to engage them.
Thank you. Ken?
Well, looking back to the first Trump presidency, 2016, 2017, right after the election, I think Japan's alert level was very high, so that Abe was calling to see Trump at the Trump Tower in November, and Trump was very happy, and it was the first occasion to earn the personal credit from him, which created a huge platform for Japan to expand their diplomatic horizon, because everything that Shinzo Abe does can be trusted by the White House. That's a great, I think, asset that Japan has gained during the first Trump presidency, which was not a bad experience at all for us. And then the Secretary Mattis actually took a trip to Korea and Japan on the first week of February, confirming the U.S. commitment in Northeast Asia. And the first summit that we had in Washington, D.C. was 10th of February, and we came up with joint statement, which almost covered the whole things with what they really have agreed upon towards the 2016. So within those like 2 months time frame, that the Japan-U.S. relation has set the course to move things forward. So many other things are there, but this time it is very hard to realize that kind of agenda. Ishiba asked the Trump team to meet somewhere in Florida or New York, but seemingly, as the report shows, that they have rejected. So it's not about the country; it's about the kind of the consolidation of the power which leaders, how much leader have earned. Ishiba it was not really qualified from that perspective, which really creates a lot of concerns about this, and that applies to Philippines as well. I mean, especially that nuances that the United States offered the commitment to Philippines was much more complex than the United States can offer the Article 5 coverage to the Senkaku, and there are so many islands in Philippines, and Article 4 coverage is quite shaky. And I don't know how much that Trump team will understand those notions, including those over Taiwan. Like who can really describe one China policy, 6 assurances, and how you can really apply it to them by the new team. And then that is something that the China can claim that a violation of the U.S. traditional policy, so to the South China Sea, that can really create very much unintended kind of consequences over the interpretation, which I don't think expertise have been shared among any of those Trump team over the China or the South China Sea policy. But China has its own kind of way, the rule playing book to deal with them, and this is one of the danger that it could come out. And And I think from the U.S. perspective, those kind of the practices which professional diplomats have shared were not really shared on this. So this is something I'm very much worried about, and I'm bringing in those, the expertise practices on how to continue the like a physical presence and joint exercises, and those are the things that we really need to keep on track. And the second, on the ASEAN and the Global South, this is also how very complex way to look at it, because when Biden tried to have like a, for example, Summit for Democracy, right? And to us, to me, it only really creates the divide in the world more even deeper. And since the like a kind of rise of like electoral democracies in parallel with the economic growth, those kind of theory has already been, stopped since 1997, according to the BDM and those statistics, which means that emerging economies are emerging without going to the democracy. So how much that the United States can really continue to be, we like the United States to, have a platform of the democracy in advancing the foreign policy, but creating such kind of norm in the institutional manner would not really work well, and also constrain our allies' policy to deal with them. And I don't know, coincidentally, seems to me like President Trump seems to not care about those principles. So they talk with Erdogan, they talk with Putin, and that will create another unintended consequences that accidentally that can really work out in a way that bringing those kind of authoritarian leaders to the U.S. radar screen. And those are something that can be, I think, categorized as a chance that we can really move it forward.
Okay, thank you all very much. I've been told that even though this session is scheduled to end, we might be able to extend it for just a few minutes since we're going into lunch. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes, could you please identify yourself?
Hello, my name is Kento, graduate from Keio University, and currently studying at the Columbia SIPA right now. I have a question about the role of the multilateral development banking, like specifically World Bank Group or Asian Development Bank. I did the summer internship at the World Bank Group, this summer, and I kind of wonder about the next 4 years. Well, how like Japan and how United States can keep the commitment or engagement through the multilateral developments such as the World Bank Group and ADB against, for example, BRI or AIIB.
Who wants to take that? Anybody?
I don't know much about IFIS, but I'm sure we are committed to the support by World Bank and IMF and other international financial organizations through those international financial organizations. And but we didn't talk much about this today, but we need to come up with ways to better reflect the viewpoint of the Global South countries to the operation of these organizations. And I think we cannot do without it in the coming 4 years. So easiest way to do it is to do it in relation to those organizations, international financial organizations. So I think we need to do these two issues parallelly, being ready to use these organizations to support developing countries, as well as to come up with ways to better reflect their viewpoint to these organizations. And we are committed in these two efforts.
All right, I didn't see any other hands for questions. I think everybody must be hungry for lunch. I think that we have had an extremely robust discussion. I must confess, I am still a little pessimistic. Many of the topics were. If we're looking for room for optimism, I will say that Southeast Asian countries are very good at following Scott Snyder's policy of smiling, flattering, and bartering. And it sounds as if we're going to need a two-track approach. We're going to have to smile, flatter, and barter in a very kind of personalistic way with Trump and members of some of his inner circles while trying to craft some strategic, logical policies towards the Rubios and others who are working in a more traditional framework. And let's just hope that the U.S. and Japan can manage to do that in Southeast Asia. Join me in please in thanking our panelists.